Hey, so I just wanted to do a quick review and then go into depth on how I approached the modern day market professional in comparison to the 19th century, uh, marketing of music. And to preface this, I just want to say that I think marketing music is sometimes a harder concept because we have our notated music, no problem. That's something that can be written down, published, produced, copied, distributed. But as recorded music comes a little bit later. And so for modern day, that makes a little bit more sense as far as the same things. But as far as performances, it's a little bit harder to market because it's something that's temporary, it's fleeting. So it's a little bit harder to grasp. Literally grasp. It's hard to grasp something that goes through time. So in our first reading, um, just a quick review, we had our tier one, which is our patronage, and our artisanal. I put sponsorship under here. Sponsorship can fluctuate between artisanal and market, but when you look at the example that Dr. Pippin gave us, where writing for was his own purpose, it's artisanal. He's being sponsored, but it's artisanal. All these different composers had sponsors. They were given stipends. They were allowed to write and be an artist within that. But then sponsorship again can be within that tier two market, as I will explore hopefully a little later. Tier two, three, tier two, nice and easy. Market, buy, sell, economics. We're good here. I'm good here. Basic buy, sell, supply and demand, market professional musician, right here. Easy. Tier three, I really agreed with our summary reading that this should be complex. That as each of these add on, layer on, that this doesn't necessarily mean a modern corporate structure like we think of, but as a complex structure. You might have, as was mentioned in the Broyles reading, an orchestra, or as a whole, or an orchestra musician who plays as an orchestra to be an orchestra, but then they're also the opera house orchestra, but then they're also the orchestra accompaniment for a touring musician. And all those different roles that they play make it more complex, not necessarily corporate, within the 19th century view, late 18th, 19th century view. Then, with those three ideas in mind, trying to look for them within the Williams reading, I actually found more layers within the Williams reading, especially as he's talking with that interrelationship of how things work between the different layers of artist, musician, market. So, creativity, artist, market, funding. Funding helps the artist. Artist creates for the funding consumer. So, I really liked our basic. I was good with artisan directly. Art, it goes directly to the consumer. Funding goes directly to the artisan. Back and forth, simple, no complexities, nice and easy. Then the next tier, and this is semi-artisan, semi-market, and I actually marked it into the markets category, was our post-artisanal, post-artisanal. And so Williams actually defines this, even though it has the word artisan in it, as being a market. And this is where Professor Pippin emphasized the distributor, the bookseller. Williams talks a lot about these through literature, which is a lot harder, easier to grasp literature, holding on to, versus a performance. So, distributor. Then our market, our copyrights, and our loyalties. And this gets a little more musician friendly, where our royalties, you write a piece, you perform a piece, somebody else performs your piece. You own the concept and the idea or the performance, but somebody else is also marketing and making money off of that as well. So it's a little more complexity. Again, the idea of not changing what is actually happening through time, even though it kind of, the strength of these changes through time, it's adding these layers through time. And then, of course, our bottom ones are corporate, salaried, our more complex structure. And then I thought it was interesting. Williams mentioned post market, which is our modern patronage. And I think this is where defining how our modern music institutions kind of gets a little fuzzy. And I disagree with you, Dr. Pippin, on modern music institutions being narrowed down to just a couple is just so vast as far as the world of music and art versus the world of commodity and how these two intertwine. So I made a little chart defining these as well. So again, we have the artisanal patronage right at the top. This actually starts to get a little more complicated through modern times as things interweave and intertwine. Broyles mentioned this as far as the artists in Paris and how the lines blurred between public and private. And if you really wanted to define this list in just a couple of words, it would be public and private. And you could do the same thing with the 19th century composers. Were they writing for the private consumer or were they writing for the public consumer? Whether the public consumer was the everyday middle class or the lower nobility and the bourgeois. So a lot of that flexibility and that line blurring. But I really wanted to cover some of these others that were important to me as well. So artisanal, modern day, we have our street performers, street artists, street musicians who perform for the love of performing and may make a little money on the side, but it's still directly just for performing the art, just for being a musician and keeping that true. Small ensembles. I heard a beautiful wind quintet performing with a local composer. Local ensemble performing, still interacting and interweaving, but very, very artisanal. And where we love to be as musicians and artists, just hang on to that little piece of art being art because it is art, or music, holding on to music as music because it is music. And that's where this is where our brains tend to stick, the love and the joy of music here. Then we scoot on over to our patronage. I decided to include private lessons in patronage just for the fact that it is artist, consumer. We teach, student, parent, consumer. Patronage. I think as teachers that is something that I wanted to put on. Also, bands for hire, especially if they're performing their own music, kind of falls under the patronage, kind of doesn't, but for the most part, simplest answer falls under there. And then I started thinking, all these arts coalitions, International Double Reed Society, National Association for Music Education, artisanal, music for music, musicians helping musicians, musicians passing on the art of performing or playing or pieces to be performed to other musicians, music educators helping music educators. All these things fall within that coalition piece and fall somewhat between market. These things are marketed to us, but also fall under the artisanal patronage as well. Sponsorship goes a little bit in the artisanal market piece as well, where you had the lesser nobility and the bourgeois paying for their names to be associated with these ensembles to get a little bit more prestige, is the word I'm looking for. Prestige with their name associated with these groups. Well, the same thing happens today. You have orchestras, whether they're big fancy orchestras like the London Philharmonic or the Colorado Symphony Orchestra. These things still have sponsors and patrons. You open up that program and there's lists of hundreds of names of patrons and big advertisements from their sponsors, and this is still a prestige issue. Yeah, it's a marketing tool for these companies, but they're being associated with something that they know that consumer is wanting. And so therefore that commodity of being a sponsor or the commodity of that program has its own relationship with as well, somewhere between that market, artisanal range. This is crossing the fuzzy line of those tiers. Community ensembles as well with that. Then we move into our lesser corporate structures, but still in this range as well, still in market. One of my favorite radio stations is the Denver Jazz Station. It's public radio and television. They still need sponsors and patrons. Couldn't think of that word. They still need sponsors and patrons to function, but they're still a corporate structure. There's still musicians that are on salary. There's still musicians that get commissioned. There's music festivals that also requires patrons and sponsors, but are a little bit more structured, more like the market than they are purely artist. State structures. I was really trying to identify something that would be more like the nobility holding on to their artist or solely owning their artist. And the best thing I could think of actually was military bands, military choirs. They function, they get paid by government, they function for the government. Yeah, they do tours and concerts and other things that kind of interweave within this as well. But they have a primary function. Their primary function is state ownership, which kind of goes with our nobility from the 19th century. One of the things that came out again through the Broyles was that the German orchestras, that those different wars and things that really pushed through Germany decreased funding, and thus the orchestras fell apart, not because of the market, but because of the economy itself. So that was another thing that kind of struck through with the military bands and how they developed their support as well. I also put educational systems under state because it's a state frame, but it still involves everything else underneath it. I also wanted to include churches because they are an institution that supports music. Sometimes they hire musicians, sometimes they don't, but I just felt that needed to be on there. And then finally we get to the big monster. We have our corporate. ASCAP can be considered a coalition, but in supporting their artists, they've become a big nasty corporate. They've got their market level copyrights and other things that are involved with ASCAP, but they're a huge part of how our modern day corporate structures work. Recording studios, music publishers, especially Warner Brothers. Warner Brothers record, Warner Brothers publish. You could be an artist and lose your copyright to your publisher, depending on how your contract is written. So that gets extremely complicated as well. And then radio and music services. I thought was a really another interweaving thing as far as being a corporate structure. Not the public radio, but the big time radio, Google Music, Apple Music. You've got people who have music careers, who deal with music, who in themselves are artists, but they're salaried. But then there are people who their music is played and they get their royalties because of the copyrights, and that's distributed and filters back up to the artist. Looking at this way was actually gives a little bit for myself a better perspective on how, what, why, how the music was written, what music was written, and why the music was written, not just today. We all claim that it's just for the love of making music, but there is so much marketing, even especially as educators. Our educational systems are our market. We have to market ourselves and our music to our students. We have to market ourselves and our music to our parents. We have to market ourselves and our music to our administrators. All these things, and suddenly our work does not become art. It becomes a commodity and something that we do need to promote and market and sell, whether it is within our artisanal patronage, private lessons, or whether we're working for that market structure, that intermediary, semi-intermediary through the education system, or if we later become amazing curriculum writers like Susan Brumfield, where our materials are published and distributed. And all of these are still within the music education realm, but work at those different tiers as well. I think it's important as a music educator for myself to recognize that it's not just about the music, as hard as we push about that, but really making that mind shift of looking at these as marketed commodities. I'm sure I missed a few. I'm sure you could help group and summarize a few more. I look forward to reading your comments, and thanks for watching my video.